Good day, friends. So, in this part 2 of this audiobook of Geeta Rahasya, written by Lokmanya Tilak, we will now be listening to the author's dedication, and that will be followed by author's preface for the book, which itself is very, very expansive. So, in this author's dedication, at the end of the page, a reference of shlok number or stanza number 27 in the 9th chapter of Gita or the 9th adhyaya of Gita is given, and I will read that first, and then I will read the dedication by author. So this shloka means, whatever you do or eat or offer by way of sacrifice or give or perform by way of austerity, dedicate all that to me, O son of Kunti. So now I will read the author's dedication. How very profound is the importance of the Gita, which was expounded in ancient times by wise men and which was further explained in various ways by acharyas, and how limited is the scope of my intelligence? Still, I am impelled by my rashness to explain the same once more, keeping before my eyes the old Shastras as well as notable modern ideas and honorable people desiring to understand what is doable and what not doable deserve to hear this new explanation. Having made this request to revered persons in the sweet words of Kalidasa, I, a Brahmin, by my name Bal, the son of Gangadhar, born in the family of Tilak, belonging to the clan or Gotra of Rushi Shandilya, and a resident of the town of Pune, situated in the state of Maharashtra, following the path of the good, and with the words of Hari in my mind, do dedicate this work to the Lord of Lakshmi, the soul of the world, in the Shalivahan Shaka 1837. May the blessed Lord, the highest Purusha, be pleased by this dedication. So now we will listen into author's preface, which starts with the meaning of an ovi by Sant Tukaram Maharaj. The meaning is like this: I am only repeating the stale words uttered by saints. How can an insignificant man like me know this? This was said by the great saint of Maharashtra and India, Tukaram Maharaj. Although in the beginning of this book, I have explained my reasons for publishing it, in spite of the fact that there are in existence many Sanskrit commentaries or criticisms or Prakrit translations or exhaustive and universally accepted expositions of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Yet, there is no better place than an introduction for explaining all such things as cannot be included in the discussion of the subject matter of the book itself. The first of these things is about the author himself. It is now nearly 43 years since I made my first acquaintance with the Bhagavad Gita. In the year 1872, during the last illness of my father, the task of reading out to him a Prakrut commentary of the Bhagavad Gita called Bhasha Vivrutti fell to my lot. At that date, that is, when I was only 16 years old, it was not possible for me to fully understand the import of the Gita. Still, as the impressions made on my mind in young age are lasting, the liking for the Bhagavad Gita, which then came into existence, did not die out. And when I had later on made further studies in Sanskrit and English, I had occasion to read from time to time the Sanskrit commentaries and other criticisms, as also the expositions by many learned scholars in English and in Marathi on the Gita. I was then faced by the doubt as to why the Gita, which was expounded in order to induce to fight that Arjuna, who was dejected by the idea that it was a sin to war with one's own relatives, should contain an exposition of the manner in which release could be obtained by knowledge, meaning jnana, or by devotion, meaning bhakti in the local language. That is to say, only of the moksha marga in the local language. And that doubt gradually gained ground because I could not find a satisfactory answer to that question in any commentary on the Gita. It is quite possible that others too might have felt the same doubt. One cannot say no to that. When a person is engulfed in commentaries, he cannot find a different solution, though he may feel that the solution given in the commentary is not satisfactory. I, therefore, put aside all criticisms and commentaries and independently and thoughtfully read the Gita over several times. I then got out of the clutches of the commentators and was convinced that the original Gita did not preach the philosophy of renunciation or nivrutti in the local language, but of energism or karma yoga in the local language. And that possibly the single word yoga used in the Gita had been used to mean karma yoga. That conviction was strengthened by the study of the Mahabharata, the Vedanta Sutras, the Upanishads, and other Sanskrit and English treatises on Vedanta. And believing that by publishing that opinion, there would be a fuller discussion on the subject and that it would be easier to arrive at the truth. I believed I delivered public lectures on the subject on 4 or 5 occasions at different times. One of these was delivered at Nagpur in January 1902 and the other one at the Sankeshwara Math in August of 1904 in the presence of Jagat Guru Sri Shankaracharya of the Karavira and Sankeshwara Math, and at his request. The summary of the lecture delivered at Nagpur was published in the newspapers at the time. With the same object, I also discussed the matter from time to time privately. Whenever I had leisure, with some of my learned friends. One of these was the late Mr. Shripati Bua Bhingarkar. In his company, I had occasion to see some Prakrut treatises pertaining to the Bhagavad cult, and some of the ideas explained in the Geeta Rahasya were first fixed in the discussions between myself and the Bua. That means Shripati Bua Bhingarkar. It is a matter of deep regret that he is not alive to see this work, though my opinion that the creed preached in Gita was one of action had in this way become quite definite. And though I had decided to reduce it to writing, many years went by. But I thought that a considerable amount of misunderstanding would arise if I merely published in a book form this moral of the Gita, which has not been accepted in the commentaries, criticisms, or translations now commonly available, without assigning any reasons as to why I was unable to accept the conclusions arrived at by the former commentators. At the same time, as the work of dealing with the opinions of all the commentators and exposing their incompleteness with reasons, and of comparing the religion expounded in the Gita with other religions or philosophies, was one entailing great labor. It was not possible for me to satisfactorily complete it within a short period of time. Therefore, although my friends Daji Saheb Khare and Dada Saheb Khaparde had, in anticipation and somewhat hastily, announced that I was shortly going to publish a treatise on the Gita, yet seeing that the material in hand was not sufficient, I went on putting off the work of writing the book. And later on, when in the year 1908, I was convicted and sent to Mandale in Burma, the chance of this book being written came practically to an end. But when, after some time, government was pleased to grant permission to take the books and other things essential for writing this book from Pune to Mandale, the draft of this book was first made in the Mandale jail in the winter of 1910 and 11, that is between Kartik Shuddha 1st and Falgun Vadya 30th of the Shaka year 1832. And thereafter, the draft was improved upon from time to time as things suggested themselves to me, and those portions which had remained incomplete in the necessary books had not been available were completed after my release from the jail. Nevertheless, I cannot even now say that this work is complete in every respect, because the elementary principles of release, or moksha in the local language, and moral philosophy are very recondite, and they have been so exhaustively expounded by ancient and modern scholars that it is very often difficult to correctly decide which portion of such expositions ought to be incorporated in this small book without including too much. But my physical condition is now becoming weak, as described by the great Maratha poet Moropanta in the following Arya stanza, which means old age, which is the spotless white banner carried by the army of attendants of death, is already in sight, and my body is exhausted in the struggle with diseases, which are the advance guard of that army. And my contemporaries in life have passed on. So, having come to the conclusion that I should place before the public the information which I have gathered and the ideas which have occurred to me, and that someone else possessed by the same inspiration or samana dharma, as in the local language, will come to birth in the immediate or distant future and develop and work them out, I have published this book. Though I am not prepared to accept the opinion that the Gita was only an exposition of the paths of release based on renunciation, such as the knowledge of the Brahman or devotion, after providing worldly action to be inferior and negligible, I must at the outset make it clear that I do not also say that there is no exposition at all in the Bhagavad Gita of the paths of obtaining release. Nay, I too have shown in this book that according to the philosophy of the Gita, it is the primary duty of every human being in this world to acquire the knowledge of the pure form of the Parameshwara, and thereby to cleanse out and purify his own reason as far as possible. But that is not the principal subject matter of the Gita. At the commencement of the war, Arjuna was engulfed in a perplexity about what his duty was, namely, whether he should or should not take part in a war which would ruin the welfare of his Atma in the shape of release as a result of his committing heinous sins like the destruction of his own clan, etc. Though it was the duty of every Kshatriya to fight. And I am of the opinion that in order to clear this doubt, the Gita has propounded the device of performing action in such a way that one ultimately attains release without committing sin. Namely, the Karma Yoga founded on knowledge, in which the devotion is the principal factor after it had fully expounded the philosophy of action and non-action, and also the various parts of attaining release according to pure Vedanta philosophy, and had established that no man is free from action, and that action should never be given up. This exposition of action and non-action, or of morality and immorality, is called ethics by modern, purely materialistic philosophers. It is not that I could not have made this exposition by following the usual procedure and explain how this principle has been established by the Gita by commenting on the Gita stanza by stanza. But unless one is thoroughly conversant with the various philosophical doctrines, arguments, and deductions pertaining to Vedanta, Mimamsa, Sankhya, the doctrine of causality, or karma vipaka in the local language, and devotion, on the authority of which the doctrine of karma yoga has been established in the Gita, and the reference to which is sometimes very succinct. The full purport of the exposition made in the Gita is not easily understood. I have, therefore, scientifically divided all the various subjects or doctrines which one comes across in the Gita into chapters and briefly expounded them together with the most important logical arguments relating to them. And I have, at the same time, consistently with the critical methods of the present day, compared in brief and as occasion arose, the most important doctrines propounded in the Gita with the doctrines propounded in other religions and philosophies. It may thus be said that the essay Geeta Rahasya, or the esoteric import of the Gita, which is published in the beginning of this book, is by itself an independent, though a small book on the doctrine of proper action or karma yoga. But in any case, it was not possible to consider fully each individual stanza of the Gita in a general exposition of this kind. I have, therefore, at the end of the book, translated the Gita stanza by stanza and added exhaustive commentaries to the translations in different places in order to explain the anterior and posterior context, or in order to show how former commentators have stretched the meaning of some of the stanzas of the Gita in order to support their own doctrines. For example, you can see Gita, chapter 3, stanza 17 to 19, or chapter 6, stanza number 3, and chapter 18, stanza number 2. Or, in order to show which of the various doctrines enunciated in the Geeta Rahasya appear how and where in the Gita according to the catechismal method of the Gita. It is true that by following this method, some subject matter has been repeated. But as I felt convinced that I could not in any other way fully dissipate the misunderstanding which now exists in the mind of the common reader as regards the import of the Gita, I have separated the exposition of the Geeta Rahasya, or the esoteric import of the Gita, from the translation itself, and thereby it has become easy for me to show how authorities and with former history where and in what manner the doctrines of the Gita with reference to Vedanta, Mimamsa, devotion, etc. have appeared in the Bharata, the Sankhya system, the Vedanta Sutras, and the Upanishads, the Mimamsa, and other original texts. To explain in a lucid way the difference between renunciation, that is sannyasa in the local language, and action, or karma yoga, as also to expound in a proper way the importance of the Gita from the point of view of practical action. By comparing the Gita with other religious opinions or philosophies. If there had not been all sorts of commentaries on the Gita, and if various persons had not interpreted the import of the Gita, each in a different way, it would have been totally unnecessary for me to quote the original Sanskrit authorities which go to support the propositions laid down by me in my book. But such a thing cannot be done in the present times, and it is likely that many may doubt the correctness of the import of the Gita or of the propositions laid down by me. I have, therefore, everywhere pointed out the authorities which support what I say, and in important places I have given the original Sanskrit text of the authorities with translations. As many of these dicta are usually accepted as proven truths in books on Vedanta, my secondary object in quoting them has been that my readers should get acquainted with them in the course of reading, and find it easier on that account to remember the doctrines embodied in those statements. But it is not likely that all readers will be knowing Sanskrit. I have arranged my book on the whole in such a way that if any reader who does not understand Sanskrit reads the book, omitting the Sanskrit stanzas, there will not be any interpretation anywhere in the sense. On this account, it has become necessary in many places to remain satisfied with giving a mere summary of the Sanskrit stanza instead of giving a literal translation of it. But as the original stanza is given in each case, there is no risk of any misunderstanding arising as a result of this procedure having been followed. There is a story told about the Kohinoor diamond that after it had been taken from India to England, it was again cut there, and on that account, it began to look more brilliant. This law, which is true in the case of a diamond, also applies to a jewel in the shape of truth. It is true that the religion propounded by the Gita is true and unshakable. But as the time at which and the form in which it was propounded and the other attendant circumstances have considerably changed, it does not strike many as a brilliant as before. As the Gita was expounded at a time when whether to act or renounce was considered a question of great importance, to be determined before arriving at a decision as to which act was good and which was bad, many people look upon a considerable portion of it as now unnecessary. And as that position has been further made worse by commentaries supporting the path of renunciation, the exposition of Karma Yoga contained in the Gita has become very difficult to understand for many in the present age. Besides, some of our new scholars are of opinion that as a result of the present growth of the material sciences in the West, the deductions laid down in ancient times with reference to the Karma Yoga on the basis of the philosophy of the absolute self cannot possibly be fully applicable to modern conditions. In order to prove that this idea is wrong, I have briefly mentioned in various places in my exposition of the Geeta Rahasya, that is the esoteric import of the Gita, the doctrines of Western philosophers which are similar to those in the Gita. Really speaking, the exposition of ethics in the Gita is no way fortified by such a comparison. Yet, those people whose eyes are dazzled by the pleasant, unheard of growth of the material sciences, or who have learned to consider the science of ethics only externally, that is to say, only in its material aspect, as a result of the present one-sided methods of education, will be made to see clearly by means of this comparison that not only has human knowledge not yet gone beyond the doctrines laid down on this subject by our philosophers, for the simple reason that ethics and the science of release are both beyond material knowledge. But deliberations are still going on these questions in the West from the metaphysical point of view, and the opinions of these metaphysicians are not materially different from the doctrines laid down in the Gita. This fact will be clearly borne out by the comparative exposition appearing in the different chapters of the Geeta Rahasya. But as this subject is very extensive, I must explain here with reference to the summaries of the opinions of Western philosophers, which I have given in various places, that as my principal object has been only to expound the import of the Gita, I have accepted as authoritative the doctrines laid down in the Gita and have mentioned the Western options only so far as was necessary in order to show to what extent the doctrines of Western moral philosophers or scholars tally with the doctrines in the Gita. And this too has been done by me only to such an extent that the ordinary Marathi reader should experience no difficulty in grasping their import. It cannot therefore be disputed that those who wish to ascertain the minute differences between the two, and these differences are many, or to see the full argumentative exposition or developing out of these theorems, must examine the original Western books themselves. Western scholars say that the first systematic treatise on the discrimination between right and wrong action or on morality was written by the Greek philosopher Aristotle. But in my opinion, these questions had been examined long before Aristotle in a more exhaustive and scientific manner in Mahabharata and in the Gita. And no moral doctrine has yet been evolved which is different from the doctrines metaphysically expounded in the Gita. The solution given by Aristotle of the question whether it is better to spend one's life peacefully in philosophical meditation and living like a hermit, or to spend it in all sorts of political activities, is to be found in the Gita. And the opinion of Socrates that whatever sin is committed by man is committed by him only as a result of ignorance is also to be found to a certain extent in the Gita, because it is the doctrine of the Gita that is not possible for man to commit any sin after his reason has become equable as a result of the knowledge of the Brahman. The doctrine of the Epicureans and the Stoics that the conduct of the perfect jnani, or the one who is knowledgeable, is a standard for everybody from the moral point of view is to be found in the Gita. And the description of the perfect jnani given by the philosophers belonging to these sects tallies with the description of the sthita prajna, or it means steady in mind, given in the Gita. Similarly, the dictum of Mill, Spencer, Kant, and other materialistic philosophers that the highest peak or test of morality consists in everybody acting so as to promote the welfare of the whole of mankind is included in the external characteristic of a sthita prajna described in the Gita in the words sarva bhuta hite rataha, That is, meaning one busy promoting the welfare of all created beings. And the arguments relating to ethics and the doctrines regarding freedom of will enunciated by Kant and Green are to be found mentioned in the Gita on the authority of the knowledge contained in the Upanishads. If the Gita had not contained anything more than this, it would still have commanded universal respect. But the Gita does not stop there. After showing that the conflict between release or the moksha, devotion or bhakti in the local language, and ethics or niti dharma in the local language, imagined by materialistic philosophers, as also the conflict between knowledge or jnana and right action or karma, imagined by the followers of the school of renunciation or sannyasa, were groundless, and also showing that the fundamental element in the Brahma Vidya, meaning the science of the Brahman, and in Bhakti, meaning devotion, the path of devotion, is the foundation of ethics and good behavior. The Gita has shown what path of life should be adopted by a man by properly harmonizing knowledge or jnana, renunciation or sannyasa, right action, that is karma, and devotion, meaning bhakti in local language. The Gita is thus essentially a treatise on right or proper action, that is karma yoga, and that is why it has been given a position of supreme importance in all the Vedic treatises, which refer to it as Brahma Vidya Antargata or Karma Yoga Sutra, that is, the science of right action included in the science of the Brahman. The saying, Gita Sugita Kartavya Kim Anyah Shastra Vistaraha. That is, it is quite enough if one thoroughly studies the Gita. What is the use of dabbling in the other Shastras? Is indeed correct. And therefore, it is my earnest and respectful request to everyone who wishes to become acquainted with the basic principles of the Hindu religion and morality that he should first study this wonderful and unprecedented book, because as the Gita expounds the root principles of the present Vedic religion, as also its final aspect based on knowledge and giving primary importance to devotion and preaching the Karma Yoga, meaning the right action, which it had assumed after Sankhya, Nyaya, Mimamsa, Upanishads, Vedanta, and other ancient Shastras, which dealt with the perishable and the imperishable, and the body and the Atma, meaning Kshetra Kshetradha in the local language, had come to as perfect a state as possible, it may well be said that there is no other work in the whole of Sanskrit literature which explains the principle of the present Hindu religion in as succinct and yet as clear and unambiguous manner as the Gita. So friends, the next part of this very expansive preface by Lokmanya Tilak we will listen to in the next part number 3.